So Kenyans have been protesting against the current regime, and I'm curious to know what Kenyans abroad think about this, what Africans in general think about this, especially those living abroad. If you live in the UK, in the US, in France, Netherlands, wherever you live at, let me know what you think about this. And if you were on the ground in Kenya today, and I'm recording this video on Sabasaba, and apparently there was going to be a protest, a big one, but the government got ahead of things and shut down everywhere. No movement, businesses are closed, people are at home and all that. It's a shockwave. The government feels these protests, hence the proactive measures to make sure nobody protests. But other parts of the country still showed up and were protesting. And I am curious to know, if you were on the ground today, would you be on the streets? Are you the I am pro Gen Z movements? They're calling them Gen Z protests, but in my opinion and my observation, these are Kenyan protests. Everybody wants that government to go, including myself. So let me know, would you be on the ground today? You see, I have been on the ground myself. Now, I went back to Kenya. I'm currently in the UK, but I went back to Kenya last year in May. And I don't know whether it's coincidence or not, but the next month in June, protests started. And if you know me, you know that I had to be on the ground. So I was there for the first and second protest. The second one happened on the 17th of June, if I remember correctly. And then I couldn't make it to the 25th June protest. And sometimes I wonder, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because that protest was bloody as fuck. So I'm looking back to that protest and the one that I attended, and it was the most peaceful protest. I have never been to a protest before those two protests. And the first one wasn't. I had my mask on and I was alone because I didn't find anyone to go to the protests with, but it was so peaceful. The people were just chanting, reject the finance bill. Those protests started as, trying to talk about the finance bill that was going to be that had been proposed, and the government wanted to pass it. So the state of living, like, people were already on their knees, and this finance bill was going to just nail people to the cross. So they were against it. And all they were doing on the ground was saying, reject finance bill, chanting, singing. And it was so peaceful. People were there recording and nobody was snatching, or there were no businesses being looted. I remember because I was there. I was there recording with my iPhone and nobody even attempted to snatch it from me. And remember, this protest was full of people. So when you're recording, you're in the middle of crowds. Nobody bothered about your phone or your belongings. Everybody was there for one thing. Ruto must go and reject the finance bill. Police would find crowds gathered chanting, and then they would lob tear gas, and now everybody scatters and is running back and forth because tear gas was painful. I remember, oh my God, even the water that, the water cannons, that colored water that they spray to people, it actually itches your skin. It's not just water. So obviously when they throw these things to people, the water, the tear gas, people are going to run away, and the police don't care where they throw these things. They want to scatter you, even if you're just there. You're not looting, you're not throwing stones at them. You don't even care about them. You care about chanting Ruto must go and reject the finance bill, and they'll just come and throw tear gas at you, and you have to run for your lives because you don't know where that tear gas is going to land, whether it's on your head, because that's dangerous actually. So people would scatter to just breathe because the tear gas is quite potent. They are more peaceful compared to the 25th protest, which turned bloody. And then the protests that followed, now the government had caught on and they'd seen that these people are actually serious. And the government, they are experts at violence, and they use violence to kind of stop things and contain things. And they have to drive the narrative that these protests, they damage properties, they are bad for the economy, they damage businesses, and now they try to get the public to turn against the protesters by telling them that you see people are looting when people are protesting, you see, people die and all that. So the violence that has followed the June 25th protest. And I always wonder why I would still actually be on the ground. When protests were happening this past June, I really wanted to be there. The commemoration of the June 25th in 2024, I wanted to be there because I feel like power is not given, freedom is not given, at least not to the normal citizenry, not to people like you and me. That you have to take. And these protests are just kind of showing how rotten the system is in Kenya. So for me, I'd say I am all for protests. Like, people have to fight for their rights. And if I was in Kenya right now, I would definitely be on the ground. I think it's scary. I remember even going for that protest, the June 17th one. I was kind of scared. A lot of people were scared. People I would speak to, but they showed up anyway. You don't know what will happen to you. I remember after the protest, it was so difficult to go back home, but people would still show up the next one. And I remember for the June 25th one, the blood parliament protest, I was planning to go, but I had client work to finish, and then I had an appointment with a friend. So I remember I was planning to go to the protest after being done with my friend. And I remember we met up, and even before we could grab a cup of coffee, people were being unalived. And roadblocks, getting back home was a task. And all of a sudden, the day just turned. I always look back to that and I'm like, if you don't have any other reason to kind of protest a bad government, that is enough reason. So I always wonder what people abroad think about things like this. Do you think they affect you in any way, the protests? What do you think happens if the people protesting in Kenya fail, to remove this government, or if they succeed? What do you do after that? What are you doing right now to kind of support the protest if you're in support? And if you are not in support, why? I have found that people abroad are trying to support. Some people on X, they try to support. I have seen tweets where they push hashtags and, they support people who need help, people who've been hurt and all that financially. And I find that to be so beautiful. But I always wonder if those people were on the ground, would they actually go? Would they physically go to protest? Or would they stay home? I feel like this regime has to go, really. It has to go. And my problem is not even the regime, if I'm being very honest. I think it's systems. This whole thing exposes how bad the system in Kenya is. And people usually ask, why are people protesting? What is the agenda? But everybody knows the agenda. The agenda is hospitals don't work. They don't have the right equipment. I remember one of the reasons my mom passed on in Kenyatta is because of neglect. She was neglected and she passed on. So that's a systemic issue. I remember working at an HIF office in Kenyatta, and people would come to me. I don't even want to describe what was happening there. Doctors would refuse to treat patients because there's a problem with their cards, or they don't have money, or you could tell this is a systems issue. The same thing applies to, the police. There is a big system issue, and these protests are exposing those rotten systems. And now everybody knows that the police do not serve the people. That is what the books say. But in real sense, the police serve the men in power. And as it stands today, and what I've seen, where all roads have been blocked so that people don't go to the, central business district to protest, because that's the most convenient strategic point for protests. The CBD has parliament, it is close to a lot of, important places. So going there to protest has a very significant effect. And so you find that the police are directed to block all avenues that lead to this and make sure they man those places. So nobody gets into town to protest. And that is what they've done today. So people have found it very difficult to go to the CBD to protest. And you'll still find the police have, been instructed to make sure there are no protests in other towns. Although in some towns, people have still come out to protest. And there's someone who's been on the ground. These people usually don't care about businesses or your phones or anything. They are there to protest. But then they act this, the unrest that comes with it, the running up and down is usually caused, in my opinion, by the people in uniform, because they're the ones who, disrupt these protests with tear gas and lobbing those water cannons and just trying to disperse people. And in my opinion, I think it's a very ineffective way of upholding peace and a very effective way of causing unrest and chaos and then blaming it on the citizenry. Bottom line is, I am in support of what is happening in Kenya. Africans in general, we live in poverty and we live impoverished lives. And for the longest time, the older generation, they were like, that is how things are. There's nothing you can do to change it. Living in fear and you're so afraid for your life and you just feel like, that is how the system works. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So seeing people actually coming out to fight against the injustices happening, police brutality, the corruption in Kenya is crazy. Every Kenyan knows this. It just fills my heart with so much pride. Like right now, I'm so proud to be an African, to be a Kenyan. And even if someone comes to me and says, but you're poor or you're corrupt, I say, but you can see us fighting against that. Like, it's so beautiful to be able to say, yeah, we are all that, but we are fighting back. We are pushing back because this current generation is not scared. I mean, they are scared, but they do it scared anyway. We are not falling for the propaganda that, things are the way they are. There's nothing you can do about that because that is bullshit. Honestly, we come into this world, all of us coming to this world, not owning a single thing. Like, people are born literally naked with nothing. So seeing that a certain people should just be allowed to walk all over other people because they are better than others or they deserve to live better lives than others or others are more powerful than others. It's kind of, you give them that power. And I think the government is seeing that now. The Kenyan government sees that the people gave you power and the people can take away that power. And the government fighting back with, violence, that is number one tactic in their book. They are masters at violence. And that is very predictable. Of course, they have to fight back. Like, politics is the most lucrative business, especially in African countries. People don't become politicians so they can change their systems, so they can, develop their countries. They don't, vie for political positions, political seats. They don't vie for presidency to change the countries. They vie for presidency and, member of parliament seats and governor, and they're appointed. They do that to make themselves rich, to consolidate power, to be powerful. People now are saying, you know what? You will not enrich yourselves while we live in poverty, while our children, our parents, our friends die in hospitals that don't work. I remember this story. It's not even a story. This Ugandan minister who was diagnosed with cancer, and then he went to Germany to get treatment. And then he comes back to Uganda, and guess what he does? He builds a church, a very expensive, big church. This guy goes to Germany because he could not get the treatment he needed for cancer in Uganda. And instead of building or contributing to the construction of a state-of-the-art hospital that can treat cancer patients so other citizens don't have to, he goes on and builds a church. And how does he defend this? He says that this whole experience, God showed him to build a church as a thank you. And I was like, I don't even have the words for that. And then now you come to Kenya and then you hear that the president is building a 1.2 billion church. not on his land, at State House, a public land. He's decided to build a permanent structure, a church costing 1.2 billion that he claims is his personal funds. Why on earth would you invest 1.2 billion to build a permanent structure on a land that is not yours? A land that you're supposed to hold for at most 10 years, and you're just a tenant. It's not yours for the 10 years. You're just there for the time being. How? Do you know how much 1.2 billion is? That money would do so much for schools in Kenya, for hospitals in Kenya. And then he says he has no apologies to make. That when he went to State House, he found a temporary iron sheet structure, mabati structure, as a church, and decided there's no way he could be living in State House and God's church is a mabati structure. And I'm like, did God complain? You know, the more I live, the more I want to distance myself from religion, like completely. The idea of God and religion has been twisted for centuries to serve people in power. It's just crazy that a president would think this is okay. A president in an African country, Kenya, where pupils in school, some of them don't even have classes. Hospitals don't have, the necessary tools, equipment they need to treat patients. Police get paid peanuts. Youths don't have jobs. Industries don't work. But this person thought it's wise to build a 1.2 billion church at State House and has no apologies whatsoever. And people ask, why are people protesting? This is why. I don't think God has ever complained that he should not be worshipped in an iron sheet structure. I don't think God cares about that. I mean, if he has the power to create all this, then why does he care? If he wanted mega churches, he could have just, created mega churches for himself and put people in those churches to sing and praise him for life. I don't understand when people use God to justify things. And in my opinion, I feel like there is more than we are seeing here. And obviously that is looted money. It's not his personal money. At least it wasn't. This is the money, this is proceeds of corruption that they use to build things like this. And you'd be surprised to find there are tunnels in there. And churches in Kenya, for instance, the ones that politicians go to and give like huge amounts of tithes, I feel like that's just money laundering going on. I usually feel like that's just how they clean their money, and they are in cahoots with the church leaders and the bishops and the pastors. That is how the money moves. That's how they clean the proceeds of corruption. And so when somebody decides to build a 1.2 billion, a president decides to overlook everything that is happening in the country, including what people are fighting against at the moment, and builds a church, that is a serious problem, especially because Kenya is a secular state. So a president building a church in State House is a problem, because then that means he should then build a 1.2 billion mosque, a temple, because Kenya is not a one religion state. It's a secular state. So when religion and state, when the line between religion and state is blurred, there is a problem. And, I've been observing this trend where I see now a lot of even the president himself and his wife, the first lady, and his family, and a lot of MPs and ministers, they're quoting the Bible a lot. So they're trying to kill dissent by quoting the Bible and trying to, drive messages by quoting the Bible. And one thing about the Bible is there's always something for everyone. If you want to justify a certain crime, I assure you the Bible will provide that justification for you. The Bible has been twisted for centuries. I have seen that trend where they're quoting Bible verses, and that's a problem. That's a big problem, and it should worry people, because the moment people's leaders start using the Bible and religion to lead and to quell protests and to arrest, the moment they start using the word of God to justify things like that, then you've already lost the war. Africans have been pacified by religion. They are taught against questioning religion by all means. As far as religion goes, as far as God goes, you bend the knee. You don't question. I have seen a lot of people saying, oh my God, he's building a church, that's okay. We cannot come in between. When God is involved, we cannot talk about that. We cannot question. That is the problem. I have so much to say about religion and African and how it's used to pacify Africans, in my opinion. But I won't say that in this video. I'll just ask, what do you think as a Kenyan living abroad, or just a Kenyan, as an African in general? Because this does not just affect Kenya. Whatever is happening in Kenya affects Africa in more ways than you can imagine. And maybe I'll make a video about that. But these are my opinion, my thoughts. It's not written in stone. What I'm saying is not the right thing or the wrong thing. It's just what I think. And I'd like to know what you think. There's a thin line between good and bad leadership. But that line becomes extremely thinner when you bring God in there. It becomes blood, and now everything goes. And now people will be scared. And you see, these things that the Kenyan government is doing, for me, where they hire people to cause violence, to loot businesses, they arrest people, or they even, they shoot to kill during protests. It makes no sense, because there have been no reports where a Kenyan protester they had a gun or anything to harm anyone. All these protesters have are masks and flags. How you shoot, kill, or you abduct and end up ending someone's life just because they had a flag and were chanting should be studied. So all these things they do, the propaganda they're trying to drive, the tribalism, these are not geared towards the people protesting, the Gen Z, for instance, the young people. All this is geared towards the older generation, because in my opinion, it's the older generation that has caused us all these problems. They're the ones who vote in large numbers. They're the ones who are tribal as fuck. Try asking your parents or your grandparents, what they think about tribalism, or they will always be tribal. They will vote in someone just because they speak the same language as them, just because they're from their tribe. And these people are usually very scared of speaking against the government. And they're usually so satisfied, or they are grateful for the stupidest things. You'd give 40-year-old mama a bag of flour and 500 Kenya shillings, and she'd start worshipping you. Those are the means these politicians use to get these people to vote them. Not because they've done anything worth being voted for, but they give them scraps and they vote for them. And these people are very easy to manipulate. And so when they try to drive these narratives of, the protesters are violent, they are looting businesses, they are damaging the economy, they are attacking police officers and all that, they're not trying to get you not to protest. They're trying to turn the parents against the kids who are protesting. They're trying to turn the older generation against the younger generation. Because if these two people, the old and the young, join together, then it becomes something they cannot stop. So they must, at all cost, by all means, make sure that this older generation looks down upon these people and sees anarchists and people causing violence, not freedom fighters, not liberators, not people who want the best for their country. But this is me making this video in form of protest to say that, as long as the protesters are not looting businesses, I have not seen, for the protest I attended, I didn't see no one loot a business. In fact, those two protests were the most peaceful. Yeah, somebody's suffering and it's not the rich one. So I feel like this has been brewing. It's been in the making for years since independence. And let's uproot the systems. If systems can work in other countries like the UK and the US, even with all their issues, the systems work at least 50 or 60 or 70%. They work for the people. Why not in Africa? And if politicians and the ruling class won't make them work by themselves, then it's high time that they are forced to, because when systems don't work, the politicians don't suffer, not their children, not the people who own the big corporations. They don't. They go to Germany to get treatment and come to build churches. They live in glass houses, they drive big cars, they live in neighborhoods where roads are they don't see what a normal person sees. And so it's upon a normal citizen to push for what they want. And as someone who's always fighting for myself and always trying to stand, for myself, and not being the kind of person who says, oh, it is what it is, let it be, I will suffer here. No, I am all in support of people fighting for their rights. As long as they're not, in return infringing on other people's rights, then let's go. And I feel like it gets worse before it gets better, because the government has to fight back. Of course they have to. Why not? They spend billions of money just trying to get people to vote them and campaigning and being... Did you see how Ruto was when he was campaigning? I was observing. He'd be everywhere. He'd spend so much chopper rides. It costs billions, to campaign and get elected, because they don't have a problem spending all that money, because they know what they are going to make when they clinch that position is probably 100 times more. So they are not worried about the money. They spend so much money to campaign. Why do you think that is so? It's because politics is lucrative. So it's predictable. It's expected for them to fight back with propaganda and tribalism and violence and all that. But that just means they're feeling the heat, in my opinion. And I don't think just because they spend billions campaigning and trying to get elected and they are in those offices, it's not their right. It's not Ruto's right to be president. It's not somebody else's right to be Minister of Interior, or it's not their right. It's a privilege they are given. And if they don't use that privilege well, we have a right to keep them out, because our country, not their country, it belongs to everyone. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this topic. I'm going to be talking about this a bit more in my future videos, just because I have so much to say about this. And I really want to hear what other people think, especially people living abroad. Are you following? Are you actively participating in your own way? Or are you just living in your own bubble, thinking you'll be untouched? Because if you don't do politics, politics will do you. So just let me know what you think.